Right about now, you are listening to the Legacy and Leadership Podcast, a show where we discuss living as a leader worth following, leading others to do the same, and in doing so, leaving a legacy for future generations. My name is Jimmy Gonzalez Jr., a learning and development professional and leadership coach, sitting down with my co-host Anthony Devon Watts Jr., an expert contact center leader that has effectively led and developed dynamic teams with high motivation. Together, we have over 30 years experience in the corporate game. Join us as we discuss our growth as leaders, share the lessons we've learned, and interview others to see how their leadership style was shaped as they were mentored by adversity.
Welcome back, Legacy Leaders, to the Legacy and Leadership Podcast, presented to you by the Legacy Leadership Learning Group. Again, this is a show where we teach you what it takes to live as a leader we're following, how to lead others to do the same, and in doing so, leaving a legacy for generations to come. I am your co host, Devon Watts Jr., and I am not here with my co-host Jimmy Gonzalez Jr. But for good reasons. Jimmy is celebrating his wife's birthday, Stacy. Happy birthday, Stacy! And if you've been following us, you know that we preach sharpening your saw, making sure that you maintain your relationships. And he listened to his intuition on this one, and made sure to carve out some time to celebrate his beautiful wife's birthday. And so, as you can see, we are people who practice what we preach, right? So I will be flying this plane solo, but I am not alone. We are in more than capable hands because we are back for part two of our MBA series, again with Sunil Godse. If you listened to our last episode, you got an opportunity to hear Sunil's story and specifically how he was mentored by adversity. And he talked a little bit about his journey, how he got into the spaces that he's gotten to, and went from being an aspiring engineer student, aspiring engineer, to really becoming one of the foremost brand consultants, especially when it comes to the space of intuition and really studying and mastering that from an entrepreneurial perspective. And so we're excited to have Sunil back so that he can talk a little bit more to our legacy leaders about intuitive branding, about intuitionology, and just really, kind of his area of expertise and how you can incorporate that as a leader, as an entrepreneur, to help refine your branding approach, your branding strategy, and as you make business decisions every single day. So before we get into the meat, the nitty gritty, and all the golden nuggets start dropping like we were having in the last episode, we got to check in. So Sunil, welcome, 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 man. How are you feeling?
I'm doing fantastic, and thanks for having me for a second time, dropping hopefully some more knowledge bombs, a little bit more on the business side. So I'm happy to do that. And again, the underlying thing is that intuition, doesn't really care about personal and business, but I'm going to couch it in the business side a little bit more so that those who are running businesses or want to be entrepreneurs coming up have a real opportunity to really hone in on intuition and use it to make more effective business decisions.
Awesome, man. Yeah, actually, it was funny. Just yesterday, I was going through the process of doing some of the audio editing on our last episode, and just digging in a little bit more. And I happened to come across on your website one of your TEDx talks, right, where you got an opportunity to kind of speak at the TEDx conference, and you were talking specifically about intuition with this room of professionals and just people who are, really interested in growing as leaders and entrepreneurs and business runners, and from various walks of life, man. And it was just riveting stuff that you were just sharing. Uh, and I got a kick out of the 10-second activity you had everybody do of getting up and starting to make people hug each other. I was
Yeah,
looking at it, I was like, yeah, this is definitely pre-Rona. This is definitely pre-COVID environment. but
yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
but the cool thing about that though is even in that microcosm is just like that 10 seconds. It was profound after the fact when you brought to the attention of everybody like, hey, even in that instance, you leverage your intuition. You leverage your intuition, your gut feeling, these unspoken signals to make decisions around who you can create connections with,
Yeah.
right, in that short amount of time. And I just thought that was exciting. So that kind of got me geared up for our conversation today, and I'm really just looking to learn a little bit more about intuitive branding and again, intuitionology. So why don't we start with intuitive branding, man? So Um, I think, obviously as entrepreneurs, as business runners, people are always thinking about like, how am I going to market? How am I representing them in the market? How do I connect with my customer? How do I make it easy for them to understand the space that I serve? All that stuff. And as creatives, because I do think entrepreneurs are also creatives, right? As creatives, sometimes we can get a little bit too creative, maybe a little bit too fancy, or maybe overthink it and totally miss the mark or be blind to the fact that how we're representing ourselves and our brand may not necessarily be connecting or the way we want to represent ourselves and our brand. So I'm hoping that you can start with just like maybe explain that a little bit more to our listeners, like what exactly is intuitive branding, and how can we get better at it as entrepreneurs?
Yeah, absolutely. And so the base of intuition really kind of comes from, and when it comes into trust, and the research is very powerful when it comes to this. And in the last episode, I touched upon a little bit of the research where intuition kind of hits, and I'll do a little bit of a revival of that, where the intuition hits the limbic part of the brain, and it's really between fight, flight, think, do, act. So it's really at that level. There's no capacity for language, and all it knows, and that's why when I constantly ask people on my podcast series, and I've interviewed over 1,000 people now, how do they define intuition? It's always like a feeling, and that's exactly what it should be. It's here. There's no capacity for language, so we all kind of feel something. And when we feel something, that's when we have that emotional connection. It's also the center where the emotional connections are made. And this is very important because with those emotional connections comes a sense of trust or distrust. And so when I look at the research that went behind this, a couple of pieces are really important for our talk in intuitive branding. The first piece is that when they measured intuition, and they found that intuition acts on average 7 to 10 seconds before we actually make a decision or take an action. They did the same study, and you would have heard this on the TEDx talk, where they looked at entrepreneurs and they measured things like skin conductance and heart rate as sort of proxies for an intuitive hit, so to speak. And they found the same thing. 7 seconds before an entrepreneur made his or her business decision, intuition came up. And when it came to trust and distrust, a couple of the research studies looked at the exchange between value exchange between somebody giving somebody money or not. And when they measured the brain, that showed that it happened in between 10 to 14 seconds. And that's just what we can, that was measured back in the early 2000s. With research methodologies becoming much better, that's even getting faster. As an example of that, if you looked at the intuition that happens now, that it happens on average 23 seconds before, whereas before it was saying 7 to 10 seconds. Now that research hasn't been published. This is a colleague telling me about this. So I haven't actually seen the paper. And so I can confirm that once I actually see the paper. But the idea is that there's a lot more research coming out that's showing that intuition acts way faster than we actually think it does. So that's the base when it comes to trust. And so as a business, what you're trying to do, and we can all take a look at it, everybody who's watching or listening has looked at their social media feeds. And so there's a couple of things you look at. What stopped the scroll for you? Like, what did you stop on? So it could be, nice kitten videos or cats jumping at cucumbers and somebody scaring somebody, or somebody, doing a prank and pulling somebody's pants down, whatever the case is. And they're funny and they're engaging and they're great because they're lighthearted moments. But if you're a business that's looking to sell something, either a product or service, you have to think about, okay, how do you stop the scroll, which is the one thing, which is great. And so that's in your messaging. But there's a customer journey that also goes down. So it's not just stopping the scroll. That's curiosity. Once you have curiosity, then you get into engagement. Once you get into engagement, then you get into sort of a deeper level of trust, where you're starting to get trusted. And then that's when somebody will make the decision to purchase. And so that can take, so I think the research says 80 to 85% of the purchase decisions are made within the first 2 years. Only 15% are actually made very, very closely, probably in the first 60 to 90 days. I'll have to go back on the research, but this was something astounding. So it is a long-term game. And so what you have to do is, if you think about that customer journey, even in that split second of stopping the scroll, you got to have your messaging that resonates with the intuitive trust of the others, so that they're stopping to say, okay, here's an interesting company with a product or service that is filling something that I need. And so what intuition is going to be looking at is that in that messaging down the funnel or down the website or other pieces of content, is there consistency between what these images are and what that person is actually about, or what that company is about, or what that product is about? And it can even be, it doesn't have to be an entrepreneur with it. It can even be something like even ketchup, right? And so one of the examples I give is like, for example, we've used Heinz because we use Heinz in my family. There's that emotional connection back to the family unit. Recently, I think it was a couple of years ago, Heinz came out and they devastated a town in Toronto, in Ontario called Leamington, where they actually make tomatoes. And they fired a bunch of people. And one of my friends actually worked at the plant. He was there in R&D, and they saw it coming. That, for me, that went against my values. When that goes against my values, what happens is now I switched my brand from Heinz to another thing called French's. And so this is a commodity item. Everybody buys it, but there's some value attached to it. And so the thing with Heinz, if they want to woo my interest back again and get me to trust their brand again, it's not just the cost of their advertising, saying Heinz is a great product. They're in McDonald's and all this stuff where I see their logos and all that. But they also have to extricate me from the decision I'm making to buy from French's. So the cost is 2 to 2.5 or even more once you lose that trust, right? And you have your trust, it's under 14 seconds. So this is where you have to be very, very careful with your messaging. And so when it comes to, spreading your message, what is your purpose? Why are you doing things? Why are you in business? Right? Even every product solves some problem, right? I mean, you can look at Head and Shoulders shampoo, for example. Again, a commodity item, but when you're looking to me, maybe it's something that's going to help, revive part of my scalp. And I've got a helicopter pad up on my head, right? So still, if those are commercials that really kind of resonate with me and it's filling a problem, and I'm being a bit facetious in some of them, but I'm looking for a product or service to fill a need that I have. And when they do, and that messaging is consistent, I see that in a bit of the packaging, I see that in the ads, I see that in how they carry themselves as a company, then I spend money on that. And so the first thing is, why are you in business? And there was a story, right? If you're in business because you want to replicate somebody else, because you saw a Lamborghini or somebody is on vacation, they love to do that, you start mimicking that person, I'm going to find that out right away. Sure, I might like the stuff. Sure, we're driven by these dopamine hits with these metrics, but I ain't buying anything from you. And the people that I interview who actually have mentored influencers who've had 2, 5, 8, 10 million Instagram followers or Facebook followers, they don't buy a damn thing from them, right? They go on and sell a t-shirt, 5 t-shirts out of 8 million followers. Are you kidding me?
Wow.
Right? And so this is the cost of trust when you don't have messaging that resonates. So they may have 8 million followers because they're very popular, they have a great story, they're famous, whatever the case is. But that's the level of my engagement from my intuitive perspective. When they're selling a shirt, then I know there's a disconnect between what they're presenting on social media and selling a shirt. I'm not looking from a shirt from that brand. I'm looking from a shirt from another brand that is in the business of shirts, right? Or if that influencer is really behind a movement that I resonate with, then I'll buy that because there's a movement. I'll give you a very good case study. One of the people I mentored was someone who's in the industry of selling outerwear. It's not outerwear, sorry, swimwear. So a lot of bikinis and sort of on the higher end of these kind of women's, really basically bikinis is where they were in. And so I really asked her, what was her purpose? What was she really doing? What's passionate about what she's really doing in life? What drives her? And so she was saying, well, I really want to save the planet. I really want to save the oceans and this. And I said, well, is there a way for you to integrate that story into what you make? I mean, it's bikinis. Yeah. And so she said, sure enough, what she did is she found recycled fish nets. So she started making bikinis out of recycled fish nets. And so the impact of changing that was not only just a story, but people came to her for that story. And so the number of customers shrank because what she did is she moved the cost of her bikinis high, but the shrinkage was probably, she lost maybe 25 to 30% of customers, but the other customers that came and the new ones that came on board bought 2 to 3 times more.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
because they were behind that movement. And now she has a sustained business with the message And so guess what? People are gravitating to that message. Now she's got some amazing success, and she continues to get more influencers being involved because of the story. So if you look at even the model coming on board, they can get lots of opportunities to model wherever they want. But when there's that story that's involved, that story is carried by that model to her influencers or his influencers or their circle of friends. And then you get, that network marketing effect, people telling other people.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely,
and,
man.
and that's where your intuitive branding really comes in. And what intuitive branding really is are you doing everything that with your purpose, your messaging, how you manage your employees, how you treat your customers, how you are as a leader, and what do you stand for? And if there are people that resonate with all of those, then guess what? People are going to want to be work for you. Customers are going to want to buy from you and more, and they're going to tell other people. The marketplace loves your messaging, and that's how you crush the competition. And that happens in under 14 seconds. And they crush the competition because 99.9% of the other businesses are simply not
Not
doing that. And
doing
if you
it.
look at Nike, what does Nike stand for, right? And so so when they came out with the ad with Colin that they supported, some industry pundits were saying they shouldn't get into this political game, et cetera, et cetera. But their sales skyrocketed. There was a
All right,
thirty
yeah, went
percent
through the roof.
boost, and then they were also able to penetrate the European soccer market, where they had no business being in, but they stood for something. And so they go into the European soccer market where they're letting an outsider in, but they're letting an outsider in because that brand stood for something and the athletes can get around it. Now there's the development of business because they actually stood for something and people are coming behind it. And so that's essentially what intuitive branding is making sure that you've got develop that trust along the way in everything that you do. And you don't worry about what the competition is doing because I'm pretty sure that they're not doing that. And time again, there are case study after case study after case study. I mean, one of the ones that I have that I was instrumental in is there was a struggling business that was $400,000 in revenue and falling very, very fast. And they needed to really, really get help. So they brought me on board, and I had two caveats. The first was uh, with the two co-CEOs, step away and let me make the decisions. I don't want any meddling in what I do. And the second thing is to make sure that you let me kind of handle the reins of everything from the operations to the finances and to the expansion. And so the first thing I did once they agreed was that I raised all the salaries. And so they're like scratching their heads saying, did we hire the right consultant? The reason why I did that is because the sense that I got is there was zero trust between management and the employees. And the employees were treated like sardines. They were there and you can tell by the conversation, you can tell by the body language, you can tell of how they referred to the employees that they were just really numbers. And that there's zero way you can run a business, let alone expand a business by doing that. And so that's the first thing I did. It got the attention of all the employees saying, who is this new person that's come in? And they were initially suspicious
Of
about
course.
who is this
Yeah.
guy, and maybe they're throwing money at me because they're trying to appease to us and maybe hold us for a little bit longer. So that trust wasn't necessarily instant, but it was a consistency in my actions, like actually asking them for opinions, like when they had programs, actually put it in place and not look whether it's going to cost us an extra few $100s or a couple
Mm-hmm.
$1,000s. If it made sense to the culture, if it made sense to the people, if it made sense to making jobs or workflow a little bit easier than it previously when it fell onto deaf ears. Here's someone that's actually paying attention to the front line, saying, I value you, I see you, let's put it in place because it makes a great business case as well. So this is not something that you're just doing willy-nilly. This is something where they actually felt that their opinion was really valued and that this is how it improved the company. And consequently, when I was able to look to expand that company, um, all I had to do was look at the expansion areas and say, this is where we're going. And the rest of the employees filled in everything operational, everything from workflow, everything from operational manuals, everything from helping each other. Some of them even wanted to travel with the team on their own, dime in some cases, or on weekends when they didn't get paid, just to help us out. There was such a collegiality between everything. And what happened was then we were able to expand properly and fast with little to no headaches. And so we went from 400,000 by the time I came in. I left a couple of years later. We reached $3.5 million in revenues, and we were the sixth fastest growing company. This was back in '05. And yeah, we were sixth fastest growing company in Canada for a couple of years. And it was just based on trust, right?
Wow.
And of course, you've got to have processes. Of course, you've got to have business plans. Of course, you've got to have business cases. Of course, you've got to have data. You've got to have some experience behind that. But so it's just not a whim that you just wave a magic wand and it happens. It starts with trust, but you still have to have all the back end business processes that support that trust. But what happens is now you have a whole bunch of people all with the same goal, which is to make the company successful. And interestingly enough, when I left after 2 years, that same company, because I was gone, crumbled in 6 months. Gone in 6 months because the two co-CEOs never learned about that trust issue. And despite me telling them in the 2 years how they need to change how they do things to establish trust, to make sure they are ethical, to make the right decisions, they went back to the old way of doing things, and that's why I left. I said, I'm sorry, you guys are not listening. So when I left, 6 months later, they imploded because, again, they didn't have to. They could have continued. They couldn't continue to trust. I gave them the runway. I gave them the manual. I gave them the map. I even gave them all the expansion areas that they can. So that $3.5 million could have easily been 10 million because that's where my projections were going. But instead, they fell by the wayside. So it's too bad.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. Well, man, I love a lot of the things that you've shared. I want to make sure that I do it justice by kind of summarizing my understanding of it, right? So when we talk about intuitive branding as entrepreneurs, really it comes down to the marriage of authenticity and messaging, it seems right? Like authenticity and messaging. Like when we're in the marketplace and we're kind of, on our socials and all the different places that we're advertising what we do, to make sure that those two things align. Like the example you provided of the influencers who may have been flashing a certain lifestyle and then turning around and asking you to buy a shirt, right? And there's a disconnect there. Like, that's not why I follow you. I follow you for the jokes. I follow you for the lifestyle. I follow you for the entertainment. And now you're asking me to to purchase, like you're a retail business, and nowhere along this journey have you made that connection for me. And so, like you said, the conversion of like 5 shirts for 8 million followers. I mean, that's abysmal, right? But
yeah, and that's authenticity has to also be within, not just in the messaging, but it's also the way you treat your customers, the way you treat your employees, because that authenticity is in that feeling, the relationships, and it comes down to that relationship that you have. What's the relationship with your employees? Are they open and honest? Do you value their creativity? Do you allow them to fail? Do you really care about their opinions? Because this is what the employees are going to feel, even if you conceptually say it and practically don't do it. I don't trust you then, right?
Exactly.
So if your actions don't match your words, when you're not watching, boy, oh boy, then that's when you turn from a 3D person to a 2D company, which is a statistic. Now I'm on the internet looking for another job because you just told me, even though you said you valued my opinion, you're not following through.
Your actions don't match that.
Absolutely. Customers, the same thing. Marketplace, the same thing. And when that starts seeping in, so you can have the best messaging and the best thing in the marketplace. But if something happens inside and you treat employees like crap, that gets out. When that gets out, then that gives people pause. Well, that's interesting. I love their ads, but I've got these scathing letters from employees that are coming out on Twitter. What's the disconnect there? And so for me, it all depends on how embedded I am in the products and services. Is that enough to pull me away? Perhaps not. But for other customers, it is.
Maybe.
Yeah. And so you got to be very, very careful there. And so this is where it's really important to take the time to really take a deep dive into understanding what your intuitive signals are, because it's these signals that help you understand if the decision you're making is going to be trustworthy or not. And so we were talking earlier about the 7-day challenge.
Yeah.
Well, so if you look at sunilgodse.com, everything there is on intuitive branding. There's a new podcast series coming out that's dropping on May 6th. The very first podcast guest is Brendan Kane, who is famous for starting. He actually took a brand new account and grew it to over 1 million followers in 30 days on his Facebook, to the same thing on Instagram. And he's written 2 books on it. And he said yes because everything he does was on intuitive branding. So he absolutely wanted to be podcast guest #1 for me. And so he's the essence of what intuitive branding is. But if you look at the 7-day challenge on intuitionology.com, what that does is it takes you through a problem. You identify a problem, and it could be a business problem. It could be anything you're looking to solve. And the first thing I do is get you to understand what your inventory of negative signals are and what your inventory of positive signals are through a couple of those steps. And then once you have that, then you figure out, okay, what are the right steps to solve my problem? And then those are based on signals. If it's the right step to your planning, there's a positive signal, which feels like a flow where the dots connecting. If you're trying to force something in there, then a negative signal is going to come up, say, Sunil or Devon, come on, you know better, right? And that negative signal, that sort of rub, or that's a slight tension or some abrasion, however it is for people, it's going to tell you that's a step I don't need. So what you're left with is the steps you need to take. Then the next step is surround yourself with the right people who are going to solve that problem, make a change in whatever environment, and then take action. And so within the 7 days, and you can do it faster. I mean, I don't restrict people, but in that 7 days, you're able to solve a problem. And what you also know is you have your intuitive signals that are positive and negative. And to help people along the way, I have 2 people that actually go through the 7-day challenge with you. And the first person is by the fellow by the name of John Harris. He was actually selling his house, and he used the 7-day challenge to sell his house. On day 1, he got a bid of minus $20,000 from a really aggressive real estate person, threw her card in his face, and he says, I don't trust her. His intuition was saying, I don't trust her. Now, had he not been in the 7-day challenge, he was actually saying he would have been pushed to sign, because he typically gets very scared. And she was saying, yeah, this is all that your house is worth. And he said, okay, I just want to sell my house. He would have signed. But his intuition and his wife's intuition were saying, we don't trust her. And so over the next 7 days or 7 steps, he ends up having a bidding war for $50,000 over his asking price. So in that 7 days, he made 70 grand. That's 10,000 a day. That's a great change. And the second person who goes through it is somebody by the name of Ashley Michelle. Ashley was suffering from PTSD, depression, anxiety. And here's why. At one point, a couple of years ago, she walked into her boyfriend's apartment, and he had just murdered their best friend in the bathtub. He closes the door behind her, locks it up, puts a knife to her back, and says, I'm already going away for 1 murder. Might as well make it 2. Her intuition gets her to calm him down. She calms herself down, and he assaults her, he chokes her, he asks her to clean up the blood. And then what her intuition is just waiting for in a moment to escape. And she finally sees that moment as he's walking away to the bathroom. She takes a beeline for the apartment door, unlocks it, and runs 18 flights of stairs down. Obviously, she called 911 and lived to tell the story. And she actually gave me an interview, a podcast interview about her story. So she used the 7-day challenge to deal with all the stuff that she had to deal with. Now, it didn't get rid of it, right, but it minimized it. And what she learned is that here are some people I can trust, and here are people I can't trust. In just getting me to live, in just getting me to walk outside my apartment. And she found that she can go to the gym. She can actually start trusting people. And so she used the 7 days to do that. And she's a huge fan of what I'm doing, just because of the amount of trauma that she's had to go through. On top of that, she was again assaulted when she was running. So just one thing after another for her that's happened in the past. My 7-day challenge, and I continue to advise her and coach her, is just helping her really deal with life. So if John Harris and Ashley Michelle can solve those kind of problems going through the 7-day challenge, nobody should have any excuse in solving a problem when they go through that challenge. And it's completely free on the intuitionology.com website. And then you have a template for every problem. So there you go.
Awesome. That's awesome, man. That's awesome. Actually, one of the things I appreciate too, just about kind of what you've been sharing, it aligns really closely with some of the messaging that we've been providing to our legacy leaders here recently, is around focusing on the depth of your relationships and not the breadth of your relationships, whether that be with your clients, your potential customers, right, and how you market, and focusing on getting that core, rabid following, kind of like what you mentioned with the entrepreneur who found, married her calling of wanting to save the environment with bikinis, right? And knew, hey, I'm going to lose some customers along the way, but the customers that I retain, when I raise my prices, the customers I retain, they are fanatical behind this mission. They are on board for what this mission is about, right? And so I get better wallet share, I get better, again, stickiness in terms of like customer retention, all of those things. And then now, with the examples you provided, both with John, but especially with Ashley, specifically, and her story is just so compelling, right? But when we talk about like what I gather from that is she spent that 7-step process really refining and defining what her intuitive signals were,
Yes.
and being able to try to trust those again, right? Because I could only imagine, especially in the situation that she was in, where you thought you knew this individual, right? Maybe you didn't listen to those signals, and then you found yourself in the situation she found herself in, right? Literally, her life being at risk, and it being hard to trust your own decision making again, right?
Yep.
Like, how did I even get myself into that position? And
Yeah.
to hear that, through that 7-step process, she was able to
Yeah.
find that is awesome, man.
And if you even look at now from a business perspective, from Ashley's perspective, she's now in the process of writing a book. And so I'm actually helping her through that process. And it's basically it's called Strength Through Tragedy. And she's had a bunch of posts and stuff like that. We're in the process of putting a book together for her. So here's a situation where she's used what she's had. She's trusted her intuition to move forward, to have a business decision where she can actually put things in the marketplace to help others who can actually learn from her experiences. And she's already got some testimonials already from people who haven't really looked at the book, but just the stuff that she's posting, which is very similar to what she's going to be putting in the book. It's actually saved lives. It's actually had people not take their life. And so from a business perspective, this is exactly what you want. Here's your purpose. Here's your story. Here's your messaging, very authentic. And guess who's getting drawn? Right? People. And she just started a Facebook group, I think a couple of days ago. She's up to now over 100 people in it. And she's getting even police detectives that are saying, I'm going to help you. I'm going to buy your book. She's getting counselors that treat her saying, I'm definitely going to be a supporter. They're telling other people. Radio stations are now hearing about it. This is something that just happened in the last couple of weeks. But that's the power of intuition when you use it in something called intuitive branding. That's how business is done.
No, man, I appreciate that so much. You're absolutely right. Again, another example of somebody just being authentic, representing that authenticity in their messaging, and how powerful that can be. Like you said, yeah, you have to think about things that are going to stop the scroll, like you called out, right? But then how do you really foster true engagement? And people rally behind messaging with purpose. People rally behind messaging with purpose, and I think that's what you continue to touch on. So, talk to us a little bit more just about intuitionology, how that kind of got started, and I know you mentioned the podcast getting ready to launch. So, kind of educate our listeners a little bit too on what compelled you to go down that route of getting ready to launch this podcast to support what you're doing with the intuitionology.
Yeah, absolutely. So intuitionology came about. It's funny enough. I wrote a business book called Fail Fast, Succeed Faster, which is my first book. And the premise of that book was that if you were to learn from the stories of others who had failed already, who had gone through the hurdles, then conceptually, if you were to read them and you didn't repeat their mistakes, you should be able to succeed faster. And so when I used to go on stages to talk about it, the one question I kept getting asked by people in the crowd was, Sunil, can you tell me the one thing that's going to help me succeed? And so at that point, I used to roll my eyes saying, like, I didn't come here with a cue card or a PDF sheet. This is a 400-page book, man, right? Right? I have a speaking fee. Right? So if it was that one thing, man, nobody paid me to speak. So I said, no, it's not. But until I went back to the audio recordings. And what I didn't pick up on was that the people who failed were the ones that actually surrounded with themselves with the opinions of others or the advice of others who were with the wrong relationships. Like they listened to the wrong people. And the ones that were able to break free were the ones that actually trusted their intuition. They're using language saying, I trusted my gut, or I ignored my intuition to get into the situation. I should have, I could have, I knew what the right decision was. All these sentences around intuition. And the ones that were able to break free were the ones to say, no, listen, I'm going to make the decision for me. And when they trusted themselves, then that's when their businesses came back. And so that got me really interested in things. Okay, what is this thing called intuition that everybody keeps talking that I completely missed? And this is what got me to go into the depths of what intuition is and the intuitive signals. And I'm not sure if we talked about the four types in the last episode. Um, do you remember
Refresh our listeners.
yeah, and so for the four types, what I found is the intuitive signals are there. We talked about whether they're positive or negative. But what I want the listeners and those watching to really pay to know is that those signals are jam packed with tons of information. And so in my research, I identified four types of intuition. And the best way I can show these four types is through a case study of a non-believer. So one of my friends was by the person by the name of John Rossdale. Now this guy was an investment banker. So when I was looking at intuition at that time, it was all about voices from God, manifestation, and things like that. So with John knowing that kind of stuff, he was saying, "Listen, Sunil, intuition does not exist. Okay, you can come down. I'll talk. I'll give you an hour. We haven't seen each other for a while. We'll talk about intuition. I think for 5 minutes, and let's just catch up for the rest of the hour." So I'm driving down thinking, oh man, how's this interview going to go? And he was one of my first interviewees. So I turn on the camera and we talk about these signals. And I even told him about there was a CEO that's run two multi-million dollar organizations based on seeing signals like omens behind his right shoulder, for example. And so John was saying, yeah, you know what, Sunil, I'd like to shake that guy's hand. I'd like to meet him, but come on. He says, look, Sunil, intuition is, sorry, not intuition, decisions, business decisions are made based on learning and experience, and that's it.
That's it.
And so now we're going to get into the four types of intuition. One of the four types of intuition is called experiential intuition. So if you look at your brain like an iceberg, 90% is below water, which is the subconscious. The 10% is the conscious, which is above water. What your intuition does, you're born with intuition. And there's a paper that shows that infants as young as 2 months old have been shown to have intuitive tendencies. The paper calls it intuitive physics. So when you're born with intuition, when you're young, 5,000 to 6,000 decisions a day. When you're older, 28 to 35,000 decisions a day. Every decision is being put in both your learning formal and informal, street smarts, your education formal and informal, your experience formal and informal, the good things, the bad things, and what you observe of others. Every day is being put into the subconscious area of your brain like a library, so that when a signal comes up for you, your intuition is going into the subconscious area of your brain like a library, and it's going to pull the relevant information for that decision. So if it's a positive signal because you're about to make a decision, then your intuition is saying, hey, Devon, you've been here before. I know you can do it because somewhere in the past you've had the skills to do it. It may not be a direct correlation, but I know you can do it. And so that's what happens. And so that's where you get a positive signal. Of course, the other situation is the same. So if I try and make a decision that is something that I didn't do so well in the past with, my intuitive signals are going, Sunil, this happened in the past, something similar. That decision didn't work out for you. So here's a negative signal that's telling you that you shouldn't be making that decision. So those signals are really packed with information. And I was telling John, sometimes your intuition goes against the data. And he goes, well, that's really interesting, Sunil. I actually have an example for you. And I said, well, please tell me. And so he was in the business of putting franchise locations. So things like Wendy's or McDonald's and things like that. And so they would use a benchmarking system, 9 out of 10. And a 9 out of 10 or higher means that they would put a franchise in. And they would look at things like a demographic, traffic studies, and also development in the area as examples. So there was this dilapidated area of Toronto, just a crappy area. And his team looked at it and it was a 5.5 out of 10. So from the data perspective, there's no way they should have put a franchise location. And so John goes to that location and he just looks around and now we're talking about the second of the four called situational intuition. He looks around and something about that situation is telling him that he should put a location there. And now John's saying, perhaps it's intuition. I'm not sure, but something was telling me that we should go ahead with that location. So now I'm just happy he's using the word intuition. And he goes ahead, he puts location there, and that became one of the most successful franchise operations under his portfolio of franchise operations called the Beer Market.
Wow.
And so now John's starting to get it, and we start talking about teams, and we start talking a little bit more about intuition. And then John's purpose changes. He wanted to, instead of being an investment banker, he wanted to now actually run a company. And the third of the four is called relational intuition. What relational intuition does is it filters people through to only allow those who really are there as a foundation for support. They care for your well-being, they care for your success. Not necessarily yes people, but they've got your back in any situation. And so in John's case, all the people who wanted money, fame, ego, high-end restaurants, limousines, private jets, security, cash, all of those people told him, "You're nuts," except for his wife. And his wife simply asked, "John, why do you want to do this?" And John says, "It feels right. It just feels right." And this is now an intuitive signal. And John goes on to say, "Sometimes you may have all the data, but you got to trust your intuition." And I'm sitting back like, oh my God, did we just say that? And the fourth of the four is called creative intuition. Creative intuition is the ultimate one that has you make the decision. So if you're like eating a sandwich or turning left at the light, that's not very creative. So your creative intuition is pretty low.
Right.
But in John's case, this is a guy who was making $3 to $4 million a run, running successful multi-million-dollar businesses as an investment analyst. Um, and so he, instead, you would think his intuition pick like a really, really good business, strong cash flows, great balance sheet, healthy revenues.
Yep.
Not his intuition. His intuition picks a tiny, bankrupt little restaurant. And so he does. He quits his $3 to $4 million a year, rolls up his sleeves, and walks into that bankrupt restaurant with basically there's nothing in the bank coming. That tiny bankrupt little restaurant ended up being Eastside Mario's location #1. And over the next 20 years, he grew that to over $2 billion under different brand names. Why? Because it just felt right.
Right.
That's the power of intuition. That's the role of intuition when it comes to business. And that's how you grow.
Awesome, man. So make sure that I'm following here. When we talk about the four different type of intuition that exists, right? You have the experiential, like right, rooted in experience. You have your situational intuition that says, "Hey, there's something right about this situation, regardless of what the data says."
Yeah.
Right, just from what I'm feeling about the situation, this is right. You have relation, right? Intuition rooted in relationships. Folks that you can trust and are supporting you and supporting you for the right reasons. Are motivated by the right things, right? And then lastly, your creative intuition, right? The one that allows you to, you know, listen to that voice and see the possibility, the potential of what can be, what you can build, right? So, man, that's some powerful stuff. And I mean, I don't know how many of our listeners out there, would take that bet and listen to that voice and say, you know what, I'm gonna give up on this $3 to $4 million a year opportunity to take on a bankrupt, restaurant. But again, this is another situation where intuition proved to be right. I mean, to grow that to 2 billion under multiple brands, obviously, that's awesome. And obviously, it was a combination of all four
Yes.
of those forms of intuition that led him to be as successful as he was. Man, that's exciting, man. That's awesome.
Yeah, and that's the complexity of intuition. So a lot of times you see on social media, trust your gut, live in the present moment. You see a lot of those kind of themes or memes out there, and respectfully, people don't really know what they're talking about because they don't know what their signals are. Oh yeah, listen to that voice. I mean, I heard that voice when I was 5 years old, right? When I wanted some video games that were too expensive, and my dad said no, and I heard this voice, loud voice saying, "Sunil, go door to door to raise money," and that's what I did. I raised $200 as a 5-year-old kid. I tied my two-year-old brother in diapers accompanying me. We had lots of milk and cookies, but $200, man, at 5 years old, right? And $100 went to my dad. Another 100 went to charity because that's what I liked, that I loved about it. And so this is where the complexity of intuition really is. But the way it acts is really simple, and people just need to take action even just through the 7-day challenge, or even if they don't want the 7-day challenge, write on a piece of paper what are the good decisions you made, what are the bad decisions you made, and what did it feel like? And really spend time to think about what it felt like. Because once you get those inventory of good signals, positive signals, and negative signals, then you're locked and loaded for any decision. And the misconception is that sometimes what happens a lot of times, I would say 99% of the people are really living through the opinions of others. So we've gone through a traumatic event. Somebody said something in the past that's triggered us. Somebody's given us bad advice where they don't really care about what we want, or we're just living to prove people wrong, right? Because we think we need to. When you're doing that, you're living to the values of other people. That's their signals, their values. If you're living in the present moment, if you're living through the lens of other people, you're not listening to your signals. Your signals are there, but you're ignoring them because you're looking somewhere else. And so this is why it's important to really surround yourself with the right people, because these are the ones that are going to give you the self-confidence to make the signals to move forward, right? And a lot of times it's fearful, right? I must give you I'll share the case study before, and I apologize for those who listened to the part one. I'm repeating this case study, but I think these two case studies are really, really important to demonstrate this. So Vin Jiang was, in 2016, Vin Jiang was an international magician. 2016, this guy was speaking to 100,000 people on 80 stages around the world. His career was seemingly on fire. But what his intuition was saying is that, buddy, you are a wreck inside. So he goes away to New Zealand, and he basically, there's no cell phones, isolates himself, puts up these values that he puts up on the wall, just thinks about these are the values that he wants. And he takes a step back and says, wow, that's what my wife wants. That's what my career wants. That's what my manager wants. This is what other people want. Where's Vin? Where am I? Mm-hmm. And he takes those papers down. He puts the papers back up. And what he thought was going to be a cathartic experience, what he thought was going to be a freeing experience, was frightening, because for the first time in his life, he's given himself permission to be him. And it was very frightening. The problem that he faces, he goes through that exercise, and the problem that many people face is they don't take action. Goes back to Los Angeles, same set of people, same brands that he figures he needs to have, same downtown high-rise LA, and he goes back to the same old thing. 6 months later, his parents come up from Australia, and his mom tosses him aside and says, basically, there's a saying in Vietnamese that she used and said, when you're around squid, you're going to get some ink on you, right? And so you're around squid. This is not my boy. And so he basically trusts his intuition to make every single decision the right way. After that, one of the things I told him in my podcast interview with him is something called opportunity cost. And that is, I told Vin, this is not just the 6 months that you lost doing the wrong thing. It's also the 6 months that you lost doing the right thing. And so you've actually lost a full year of your life. And if you're in the business of helping 100,000 people a year, how many people did you leave behind? How many people didn't you help? And so the problem is that problem of really kind of coming through is fear. We fear change. We fear the unknown. We just fear failure. But don't forget, with your intuition hitting the limbic part of the system, there's just really two types of fear. Either you're going to be eaten by a saber-toothed tiger, or you have a signal that's telling you what the right decision is. So your intuition knows whether you're in danger or not, just by the nature of the signal that you get. So if it's a positive signal and you're fearful, what are you fearing?
Yeah, right? Exactly.
And so one of the stories I tell a lot is there's a fellow by the name of David Dame who has cerebral palsy in his wheelchair for his whole life. He used to go on vacations and would look out on beaches to say, what if? Just never, even those intuitions saying, come on, David, you can do it. The one time he decides to trust his intuition, says, I'm going to do it. Today's the day. He gets his wife and some of his friends to wheel him up on the beach where the water hits the sand, because all he wants to do is feel the sand and the water in his toes. They lift him up and he falls flat on his face. Embarrassment and fear start coming in. And he says, Sunil, I have two things I can do in this moment. The first is I can succumb to that fear and sit back in my wheelchair and forever regret that my dream of being on a beach and feeling the sand on the water cannot be turned into reality. I am right here. Or the second thing is I can listen to that intuitive signal that's saying, David, take a step in the water. You're okay. David, take another one. Come on, David, take a third. And he continues to walk and continues to listen to his signals, step after step after step. And the water gets up to about the chin. And then he turns around. And he was blown away by how far he came. So when you live in the present moment, when you listen to your intuitive signals and you take step by step by step, you will also be blown away by how far you've taken your personal life and your business, just by trusting your intuitive signals.
I appreciate you sharing that again, because it is still, like I said, it's a super powerful message around overcoming fear, not succumbing to that fear, not being defined by fear, right? And then using your intuition to challenge yourself and get closer to your purpose, right? Fulfilling
Right.
your purpose, fulfilling your goals. So that's some powerful stuff, man. Actually, what I was hoping is, because you dropped a lot of nugget like knowledge bombs for our listeners along the way, our golden nuggets along the way for our listeners, and so I'm pretty confident we have folks that probably, much like your good friend, the investment banker, started off this conversation with some skepticism when it comes to the topic of intuition and how to really leverage that for decision making, and then now they may be at the point where they say, okay, you know what, Sunil, you know what, Devon, you know what, Jimmy, you got me open. I'm on board, right? So like, where do I go from here, right? So I'm hoping maybe you can help highlight that for our listeners here, which is, what are the next steps if they wanted to explore this a little bit more or really challenge themselves or try and grow in this space, and then if they need support in that journey, I'm pretty confident they can reach out to you. So what are the best ways to reach out to you as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So on the personal side, when they're looking at stripping themselves with relationships, you can go to intuitionology.com. They can take the free 7-day challenge there. And then there's some courses, and they can always book a call with me just to get rid of relationships there. So there's that. On the intuitive branding side, that's sunilgodse.com. That one is you go straight to booking a call, and then we can take a look at whether you need some one-on-one support. I'm right now doing a joint venture with somebody out of the UK. We're just putting that together. And so she was the coach of the year in 2019, 2020 in UK. And her and I are working together on basically intuitive branding and taking a look at that. And so we're mentoring people on a monthly basis. That's dropping probably in about 3 weeks. But yeah, it's all about that. So if they need monthly support versus one-on-one support with some coaching and action plans, or they just want to consume my content, it's all the way. It's up to them. It's all about the budget and the emergency and the urgency, I would say, and whether they want to do it the right way, or they want to kind of mingle around and then kind of find out what eventually what they want to do. But the idea is that I never want people to hit rock bottom, because time and time again, unfortunately, what happens is when people don't educate themselves on these signals, that's what happens, is that rock bottom. And in fact, my new Intuitionology podcast series is going through a bit of a rebrand next week, called the Intuitive Wake Up Call. And these are going to be stories shared by people about that intuitive wake up call. It's the bounce that they have, because those are the stories that I think highlight the importance of intuition. And I don't want people to go through that. I would rather save them time, money, and effort in getting the advice so that they don't waste all that. And just like Vin Jang, it's not just 6 months, it's a year. So double up what you think you need, because that's twice the cost. And so I would make the time investment or even just the monetary investment that you need if you need that help.
Absolutely, man. No, I appreciate you highlighting that. It's awesome to kind of see that your journey come full circle, right? With your first book, right? Fail fast, succeed faster. Highlighting folks that have fallen short and the lessons from failure, finding this through line around intuition, and now to see that manifest itself with this rebrand that's coming up with the Intuitionology podcast and the Intuition Wake Up Call. Again, another example of where people have failed to listen to their intuition and how we can learn from that as listeners, as entrepreneurs, and heed that warning. and then be intentional about being present, paying attention to those intuitive signals, so that we can make better decisions and not have to hit rock bottom to learn the lessons the hard way, man. So this has been a great follow-up, man. I really appreciate your time. I really appreciate the benefit of your expertise. It's clear that not only have you studied in this space, right, but I think a lot of our entrepreneurs can appreciate this, which is you've executed in this space, right?
Yeah.
It's not just about the theories, about the application, and you've been able to do that multiple times with multiple companies, growing them to millions and millions of dollars in revenue, but also helping these leaders and entrepreneurs refine their decision-making process, get better in tune with their intuition, and leverage that to make effective decisions consistently, man. So this has been great.
Excellent. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. So, to all our legacy leaders, first we want to thank you for listening. Please make sure that you stop and you show some love by commenting, liking, sharing. Obviously, you got knowledge bombs over these past 2 episodes, golden nuggets over these past 2 episodes in spades, and you'd be a fool to not pass that on and to share. If you have more insights or questions regarding intuition and how you can refine your intuition in that space, again, like Sunil called out, you can go to intuitionology.com, take the 7-day challenge, which is completely free, walks you through those 7 steps so that you can make more effective decisions. And then if you need something more for your business and intuitive branding, sunilgodse.com, where you can take advantage of the resources there, set up some time, get a consult, and figure out what solutions are available to you along the way. And for our legacy leaders, this is just the beginning of a series that we're going to be doing. And so Sunil did a phenomenal job of really helping to set the table for this upcoming month as we really start diving into decision-making as entrepreneurs, And obviously, intuition plays a huge role in that. And that has been that has been established. But we're looking forward to fleshing out a little bit more of these next couple of episodes. So again, if you're trying to reach out to us, just connect. Make sure that you connect on our Facebook, Legacy Leader community. Follow us on Instagram. You can find us at Legacy Leadership, also on Twitter and Instagram. You can follow me on Instagram at Leadership Docent, or Jimmy at Coach_Jimmy G Jr. On Instagram as well. We'd love to connect. We'd love to hear from you and get your feedback on the nuggets that have been dropped over these past couple episodes. So with that being said, we appreciate your time. God bless and stay encouraged. You guys have a great one.
Rage on that beat, going crazy.
You have just listened to the Legacy and Leadership Podcast, hosted by Jimmy Gonzalez and Devon Watts. Thank you, and we hope that you live, lead, and leave a legacy worth remembering. Until next time.